Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin, and welcome to part 4 of the Director series. This part is entitled Indie Legends. Again, this is an interactive series, so please leave your list of indie legends in the comments below, because again, there'll be people that I've missed, or people that I'm just not aware of. Indie legends for me are filmmakers who work either outside the studio system or they have done films within the studio system, but they still have a unique signature that kind of lends itself to their beginnings and where they started from, if that makes any sense. So first of all, I'm just going to give you 4 notable mentions. These are guys that I have a lot of respect for without liking or having many or any of their films. The first one is Richard Linklater, who did Dazed and Confused and the Before, After, During trilogy, which I still actually haven't seen. Again, he started in low budget things like Slacker, and has never really been part of the mainstream or doing studio pictures, which I have a lot of respect for. The next one is John Waters, who is one of the grandfathers or godfathers of independent cinema, with Female Trouble and Pink Flamingos, his work with Divine. Again, they're films that I have respect for what he's doing without really liking his films. And the next 2 are couple of English directors that always seem to go kind of hand in hand with each other, and that's Mike Leigh and Ken Loach. Again, these guys are really, they are legends for what they've managed to do in their 40 odd year career, because they've always managed to make the films that they want to make, whether they're popular or not. I mean, Mike Leigh has maybe strayed a little bit into more kind of popular areas than Ken Loach has. Ken Loach has pretty much remained kind of political and kind of socially aware throughout his career. Therefore, his films have never really broken through or been that popular. Whereas Mike Leigh every now and again will kind of stray into kind of more popular waters, but he still has that kind of unique and personal work. Obviously had a big breakthrough with Secret and Lies, and Naked is just an absolute masterpiece, even though it's a really tough watch. Another guy is probably Alan Clark, even though most of his work is through television and the BBC, which he got into a lot of trouble with, and the BBC weren't always that happy with what he was producing, because again, he was producing socio-political stuff that was never going to be popular or populist, but he remained true to what he was doing. So that's kind of the notable mentions. So I want to really start with, for me, the true godfather of independent cinema, in my mind anyway, and that's Roger Corman. Here's his Pit and the Pendulum, Vincent Price. I mean, Roger Corman started in the late 50s, early 60s with America International, with Samuel Arkoff producing a lot of the things. And they were going for films and subject matter to make money and be popular, but they were making films on shoestring budgets. And obviously Corman is more famous for his Edgar Allan Poe films with Vincent Price, before he kind of branched out into horror and sci-fi and producing himself. But he was really the godfather of independent cinema. He gave so many people their starts in their industry. For example, Martin Scorsese and John Sayles, and so many other people started through Roger Corman. Jack Nicholson started his acting career in Roger Corman films, such as The Raven, and he's even in a small role in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. So Corman, I still don't think Corman gets enough credit, because he pretty much started the template of you don't need a lot of money. I mean, he would, use sets more than once in more than one film. Famously in his Poe films, if there's a burning castle, chances are it pops up in another one of his films. So now Roger Corman films might seem a little dated or, cheap looking, but you have to remember at the time, it was out with the big studios, and I think most of his films actually made profits, just because it was micro budget to start with. So after Corman kind of opened the door and then sent all this kind of young talent out into the world, there was a guy in a smallish American city that was kind of doing his own thing, in a kind of bubble from everybody else, and that was George Romero, obviously famous for his Dead series of films. This is Night of the Living Dead from 1968, and obviously that just completely blew up. But again, Romero was pretty much doing his own thing, doing films that he wanted to do. Yes, later on in his career he would kind of be a little bit more mainstream, but not that much, because his cinema was generally a little bit extreme and outside of the mainstream. But again, he kind of set the template for other people, that you can actually just shoot stuff yourself and budget it yourself, and Romero is kind of an important figure as well. And then now we're into like the early 70s, mid 70s, and there was a man in Canada, and that man was David Cronenberg. This is Shivers, or the Parasite Murders. And of course Cronenberg started doing in body horror, and repulsing lots of people, and Cronenberg has matured into one of the greatest directors of all time, managing to do... He has done kind of studio films and kind of bigger films. Most famously did The Fly, which was a huge box office hit after turning down Total Recall. Seeing Cronenberg's Total Recall would have been rather fascinating though. But as soon as Arnie was attached, he didn't want anything to do with it. And Mel Brooks gave him The Fly. So Cronenberg has always managed, even if he's doing subject matter that might not seem Cronenbergian, he's still managed to have his fingerprints on it. And he's done lots of different films and lots of different genres, but he still manages to have that Cronenberg touch. And if I ever do my top 25 film directors after I've finished this 7-part series, Cronenberg is obviously going to be on the list, because he's one of my favourite directors, just because he's smart, he's intelligent, he asks the audience questions, he doesn't give the audience all the answers, and that's kind of where filmmaking kind of should be. So the next guy is, again, somebody who started in the 70s, and it's John Carpenter. And now again, John Carpenter started with essentially a student film in Dark Star, and then he did cheap films like Assault on Precinct 13, and his films were never huge budgets, but then he kind of got slightly bigger and bigger, with The Thing in 1982 and Escape from New York and The Fog. Obviously his big breakthrough was Halloween in 1978, which was the highest grossing independent film in history for a lot of years. I think it was until the Blair Witch Project beat it, I think. So Carpenter was kind of more in the mainstream, but his films were never huge successes. Lots of his films have been kind of cult favourites and have become successes well after the fact, after they've been to home video and also DVD. But Carpenter is kind of more in the mainstream. His films are perhaps now, certainly the latter half of his career, not as interesting as the first half of his career, but again he started with that independent mindset. The next we're talking about, again, is maybe a little bit later, probably into the 80s now, and it's Jim Jarmusch. I don't need an excuse to show off the Plain Archive Only Lovers Left Alive because it's gorgeous. And again, Jim Jarmusch has a completely unique filmic style. He has a unique vision. It's all about the people that other filmmakers don't talk about. It's all the people that are kind of on the fringes of society, that when other filmmakers are panning their camera around society, they always are cut off at the edge, and that's kind of the people that Jarmusch are interested in. Quite a few of these filmmakers I've done top 10s on already, so if you're wanting more punishment, you can dig through my top 10 lists on these guys, because these are all filmmakers that I would highly recommend you check out if you're not familiar with them already. The next one, again, it's probably late 70s, early 80s he started, and it's from New York, and it's Abel Ferrara. Of course, this is his masterful King of New York with Christopher Walken. Not that I'm biased, but it's Christopher Walken, and it's fantastic. Again, Abel Ferrara started making small films. He also did Driller Killer, which ended up in the Video Nasties list, even though it's not actually that nasty. And again, he started small, low budget films with kind of lurid subject matter. He also did Miss 45, or Angel of Vengeance, about a mute girl who's raped repeatedly and then gets her revenge. And Abel Ferrara has always managed to stay kind of out with the mainstream. He has had a couple of films that have had kind of notoriety or a little bit of box office. Obviously Bad Lieutenant, again, got him in a bit of trouble. Abel Ferrara, even when his films aren't necessarily that brilliant, they're generally always interesting. I've still to see his Pasolini with Willem Dafoe. That's in my backlog. But he's a guy that's managed to stay true to himself. He's managed to stay true to his kind of convictions, and he always manages to make films that he wants to make, which you have to give him a lot of credit for. So the next guy is another Canadian Armenian, and it's Atamagoyan. This is his masterpiece, in my opinion, The Adjuster, with Elias Koteas and Maury Shaken. I'd highly recommend it. It's fantastic. Again, Atamagoyan started making small films like Family Viewing and Next of Kin, challenging films about sexuality and voyeurism and essentially society, and great little films. And then moved on to The Adjuster and Exotica, and had some mainstream success with The Sweet Hereafter. Felice's Journey with Bob Hoskins is fantastic as well. But in his latter years he has kind of tailed off, and he hasn't really made very good films recently. But again, his early work to his kind of mid-career is some really interesting little personal quirky films. And speaking of quirky films, the next director I want to talk about very quickly is Hal Hartley, who I've recently did a top 10 on. Hal Hartley, again, late 80s, early 90s. His films are pretty unique. He deals with politics and social mores and relationships and sex, but his dialogue is just absolutely wonderful. It's really sharp and witty and layered, but again, he's managed to, I mean, obviously a lot of these filmmakers would love to have more money to make films, but they kind of plough their own furrow and aren't really interested in what's going on in the mainstream. They're they just want to do what they want to do as artists, which is kind of the dream to be of an artist, to do what you want to do. But obviously, because their films aren't popular, because their films aren't mainstream, they do sometimes have to struggle to get money together, and obviously what they want to shoot is sometimes constrained on budget and time. Now the next guy is probably going to be on one of my other lists as well. It's the best director who's still alive and is kind of working, even though he hasn't released anything in 5 years, and that's because of budget. And it's the most criminally underrated director of all time, John Sayles. This is his 1997 masterpiece Men with Guns, which, as you can see, is only available on DVD. I'll try not to go in the soapbox too much, but can we get more John Sayles films on Blu-ray, please? Because it's ridiculous that we don't. John Sayles started under Roger Corman. He wrote Piranha and Alligator. He started doing scripts, and then he started making his own films. Return of the Secaucus 7, Brother from Another Planet, Liana, or some of his early ones. He's the best scriptwriter of the last 30 years. His films are just masterful. But the issue John Sayles has is his synopses of his films aren't the most exciting. Passion Fish, for example, is about a soap opera actress who is paralysed after an accident and goes back to her Louisiana home, and it's the story of her and her relationship with one of her carers. Sounds fantastic, doesn't it? But it is fantastic. It's arguably the best film in the 90s. Not that I'm biased in anything, but it has probably at least 5 masterworks. But a lot of people don't know who he is. But again, because his films are socio-political, I mean, he's made Cassio Still Babies, for example. It's about American women going down to Mexico to adopt babies. Or Men with Guns. It's set in a Central American country about a doctor going into the countryside to look for his students that he sent out. His films on paper, Matewan is another masterpiece, but that's about Pennsylvanian miners' strike. But his scripts are fantastic. His characters are so well written. You want his films to go on and on and on. But unfortunately, his films aren't commercial, so he struggles to make money. I mean, his last film, Go for Sisters, in 2013, cost $1 million. I think he shot it in like 17 days or something like that. But he struggled to get the money together, which is just ridiculous. Because quite frankly, if I won a huge amount of money in a lottery, I would actually try and track John Sayles down and actually give him some money to make films. But sorry, this isn't Save the John Sayles political broadcast. But John Sayles, certainly an indie legend, and arguably the greatest indie legend, but he'll also appear on another one of these lists. So the next 3 filmmakers are slightly more modern. Again, they started in the early 90s, and it's the Coen Brothers. Now, the Coen Brothers do make mainstream films, or studio films, but they're not what you would necessarily call as mainstream films just because of their tone. There's a lot of people that either love the Coen Brothers or hate the Coen Brothers, and you could argue most of their films are homages to other film types. For example, Hudsucker Proxy's a Frank Capra homage. But they've managed to make the films that they want to make within a studio system and within relatively large budgets. but they still have, I would kind of call it, a kind of independent mindset. Yes, they've had a few misfires, most notably their version of the Lady Killers, which is terrible. But they're an example of filmmakers who still make the films that they want to make, even though they actually get a fair bit of money to actually make them from studios, because their films are relatively successful. And I'm going to finish with a couple of Japanese directors. First one is Takeshi Kitano. I finally managed to get Sonatine on Blu-ray. This is a Japanese Blu-ray. This is arguably his finest film. I would highly recommend it. Again, Takeshi Kitano is more famous in Japan as Beat Takeshi, a comedian, but he has made several wonderful films, and again, he has a certain style and a certain tone. His films are beautifully edited. His films are about the kind of randomness of violence, the randomness of life, and I would highly recommend them. And again, I'm not really sure how successful they are in Japan, but he has managed to make his own kind of films in his own kind of singular way. I mean, Kitano films look like Kitano films, they don't really look like anything else. And the last director I'm going to talk about, you'll be glad to know, is Miki Takashi, who might not seem to be a kind of independent kind of mind. He has made who knows how many films, 150 or something like that. A lot of them for Japanese straight to video, but with 1999's Audition, which broke at Cannes, that kind of let the whole world be aware of his work. And yes, he makes lots of films, and he makes lots of genre films, and he makes lots of films that aren't necessarily successful, both artistically and financially. He kind of does what he wants to do, and he doesn't seem to pay too much attention to what anybody else thinks, which is kind of the epitome of being independent. And I'll be doing a top 10 of his quite soon, but I obviously haven't seen close to all of his films. I don't know how many people actually have. I'm sure he hasn't actually seen all the films he's ever made. So thanks for watching. That's my list of indie legends. Again, please let me know in the comments who I've forgotten or who your favourites are. And hopefully I will be back to do part 5 of the director series. I'm not sure which one I'll do next. I will be leaving next level directors to part 7. So it's either solid technicians or flashes of greatness next. And again, you can prepare your own homework for those lists as well. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a nice day, and this is Solitude saying farewell.